In 1815, Mount Tambora blotted out the sun. The sky turned a permanent bruised gray, and summer simply never arrived. Millions of people found themselves trapped in what became known as a dark winter. Crops withered in the frost, and desperate communities could only wait, hoping the skies would eventually clear. When we look back at the aftermath of Tambora, we often see it as a story of human endurance, an environmental trial that the society of the time was able to survive. But the planet's recovery was slowed by a physical barrier. The eruption injected millions of tons of sulfur and ash into the upper stratosphere, creating a shield that reflected solar radiation back into space. The agrarian societies of the 19th century were built on local survival and the ability to endure years of scarcity. Today, our infrastructure is built on the opposite: constant motion and a total dependence on global synchronization. The agonizing, multi-year healing process that the Earth required in the 1800s presents a direct physical conflict with the speed and complexity of our world today. Nature possessed no rapid mechanism to scrub the upper atmosphere. The planet relied entirely on a single physical force: gravity. Gravity functioned as a slow filter, dragging microscopic particles of ash and sulfur out of suspension and pulling them back to the surface over months and years. This chart shows the recovery timeline. From the 1815 eruption, it took 2 full years for the weather to show improvement. Through 1818 and 1819, the sun slowly regained intensity, stabilizing global temperatures in 1820, 5 years later. That half-decade of global cooling was a test of sheer endurance that historical populations barely survived. Modern global infrastructure is built for a world that never stops moving, a sharp contrast to the patient, isolated farming villages of 1815. Our aviation industry is particularly vulnerable to suspended volcanic rock, as jet engines are not designed to inhale abrasive ash. We saw the physical reality of this threat when British Airways Flight 009 flew into an ash cloud near Jakarta. All 4 of its engines suffered total failure, proving how quickly these particles can paralyze flight. A global ash cloud triggers the immediate, indefinite grounding of every commercial aircraft on Earth. With the skies hazardous to navigate, the physical global supply chain halts. Cargo planes carrying medicine, food, and industrial components would sit locked on the tarmac. The impact hits the financial sector within hours. Because global trade depends on constant transit, stock markets react instantly to a total shipping freeze. This leads to massive job losses occurring at the exact moment crop failures drive food prices up. In 1816, fear was driven by a lack of information. Today, social media algorithms would push a flood of terrifying imagery and unverified claims, creating a level of panic that can destabilize nations. Our modern systems are designed for efficiency, not resilience. In a crisis of this scale, the lack of a backup plan becomes apparent long before the first year is over. The climate stabilization in 1820 was a temporary reprieve in a much longer geological cycle. Mount Tambora is a stratovolcano, a structure defined by its history of repeated eruptions and its capacity for future activity. It remains geologically active. Records from the Global Volcanism Program show that Tambora erupted as recently as 1967. More recent data is even more concerning. In March 2026, scientists recorded a sharp increase in seismicity, deep earthquake activity, directly beneath the mountain. These tremors indicate that magma is shifting and gathering pressure beneath the crust. Even with modern monitoring, we cannot predict or control exactly when that pressure will finally breach the surface. Our incredibly complex world is built on top of a natural cycle we cannot stop. Nature will decide when the next year without a summer begins, and we remain entirely at its mercy.
June 1816. Across North America and Europe, farmers walked into their fields expecting the familiar warmth of early summer. Instead, they stepped into a blizzard. Temperatures plummeted far below freezing. Frost coated the ground in July, and the heat of summer was replaced by a relentless, bone-chilling cold that remained for months. The natural world was completely unprepared. Freshly planted seeds were buried under thick layers of unseasonable snow. Birds, disoriented and starved by the sudden freeze, began dropping dead from the sky. A thick, persistent fog settled over the European landscape. It hung in the air, refusing to burn off, and behind it, the sun appeared weak and pale, as if its light was being filtered through a dirty lens. By July, the predictable rhythms of planting and harvest had been replaced by a landscape where the soil was simply too cold to support life. Today, if a freak weather event occurs, our phones immediately light up with notifications and satellite imagery explaining exactly what is happening. In 1816, there was no internet. There wasn't even a telegraph system. People retreated into their homes, huddling around hearth fires in the middle of July. They were entirely cut off, freezing in the dark, with no way to communicate with anyone outside their immediate village. In that silence, paranoia took over. Neighbors whispered of punishments for sins. Others believed the sun was dying and Judgment Day had arrived. The cold was lethal, but the terror came from the total lack of answers. Millions of people were enduring a catastrophic event completely blind, with zero understanding of what was causing the sky to fall. To find the answer, we have to zoom out and rewind the clock exactly 1 year. Halfway across the world, on an island in Indonesia, Mount Tambora had erupted. We tend to associate the danger of a volcano with flowing lava and immediate explosive destruction. But those threats only affected the surrounding area. The actual culprit was invisible. The eruption violently shot millions of tons of sulfur dioxide gas straight up, depositing the particles 50 kilometers above the Earth, directly into the stratosphere. This altitude is critical. Down in the lower atmosphere, weather systems churn with heavy turbulence, raining out debris. But up in the stratosphere, the air is incredibly still. Because there is virtually no turbulence at that height, any material that gets up there stays there. The sulfur dioxide was locked into the upper atmosphere, setting the stage for a years-long crisis. High-altitude wind currents quickly caught hold of those suspended sulfur particles. Over the following months, these winds dragged the material across the globe, directly over North America and Europe. As the particles concentrated, they formed a dense shroud of microscopic reflective droplets. These droplets acted as tiny mirrors. When incoming radiation from the sun hit this atmospheric layer, the particles reflected the heat directly back into space, blocking it from reaching the ground. It was as if the Earth's air conditioning had been switched to its maximum setting, and the remote control was permanently lost. A geological event on a single island had been mechanically transformed into a global climate weapon, effectively blinding the sun and freezing half the planet. Down on the ground in 1816, that missing sunlight triggered a cascading economic collapse. The first domino to fall was global agriculture. This chart shows how crop failure translates to panic. With seeds dead in the frozen dirt, the global supply of grain plummets to near zero, but the human demand to eat remains exactly the same. That massive gap between supply and demand caused the cost of basic survival commodities, like bread and flour, to skyrocket, putting food out of reach for the common person. Without the income to afford what little remained, the poorest were left exposed to mass starvation. The intense economic pressure broke the social order. Civil unrest erupted in cities and villages across Europe and America. Desperate crowds took to the streets, looting local bakeries and fighting over scraps. The struggle to survive stripped away the pleasantries of civilization. Neighbors turned against neighbors, forming chaotic mobs to raid local granaries in a primal attempt to feed their families. This physical suffering was amplified by the silence. People were fighting for their lives against an enemy they couldn't see, trapped in a panic fueled by the fact that no one knew why the world was ending. In 1816, it took just one season of failed crops and severed communication for centuries of social order to dissolve into a worldwide scramble for bread. June